How's it, everyone? Welcome to today's session, Developing Human Capital for BIM Success in Emerging Countries. A little bit of an agenda. We'll do an introduction, setting the stage, talk about human capital, a little bit of a case study by HBA Architects and the University of Pretoria, a little bit of a roadmap to BIM Success, and then a conclusion or close out. So just introduction to myself. I am Machiel. I'm the technical manager at Modena AEC and Infrastructure. As being a Autodesk Platinum partner and a BIM consulting and implementation firm. I'm also a ISO 19650 practitioner and a senior architectural technologist within South Africa. So quite a lot of hats. Let's talk a little bit about Africa, this continent in the middle of the world. So fun facts, Africa is the second largest and most populated continent globally. And a lot of people, 1.4 billion estimated people in Africa. The construction growth for Africa alone has been estimated to reach $71.2 billion by 2028, as being mostly developing countries. So a lot of potential within our continent. In 2020, there was this African BIM report developed that focuses on, BIM in Africa. And there were some interesting facts. I do recommend go look at the full report. But about 90% of companies or individuals that completed this report said yes, they've heard of BIM. So that's a large portion of organizations. We had about 44% said they are producing 3D models. 33% that says they're producing 2Ds from 3D models, and then 33%, about a third of the continent, is using structured information that is linked to model. So really kind of like an eye-opener of where we are as a continent around BIM. And about 45%, just short of 50% of organizations say they are adopting BIM for projects in different stages. But compared to a global scale, I think we're actually getting there and it's really growing in the right direction. But if we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, from the BIM adoption around the world page, you can kind of see South Africa is not reflective in the standard. We are kind of sitting in the background. We haven't got any mandates or processes or anything planned for this when this was taken. Now this has changed. However, even if this was the case, I do believe we are in the best position in the world for the BIM adoption. Is we are starting with a blank slate. We are starting with no real existing framework that needs to be adhered to. But we can learn from companies that have succeeded and where they failed and how to improve on it. But really from a view of how do we do this going forward, we've got more information to lean on than other people. And if you look at what is being done in South Africa against the ISO 19650, we've got the first two standards as being locally adopted as a local standard in the South African Bureau of Standards. So it's really growing in that space, in that direction. So let's set the stage for, the BIM adoption. So normally when you start looking at the initiators of BIM, you got your private sector, education, and government really kind of pushing or driving these kind of items. Now, in most African countries, you actually have the private sector and educations that start working together to drive these frameworks, to build them, to co-create them. And in doing so, they're actually pushing an alignment towards government to say we need to create mandates, we need to create a standard for a continent, for a country, to really build this up. And that's where kind of everything aligns. Once we get all these little sections to be filled in, we're really creating a new set of rules that we can work with. And that's kind of where the influences sit. Once we got these three components working together, we got our influences of BIM. And these BIM influences are normally your industry, the software, and the policymakers as being the three criteria. Now, these three will typically work together or co-create, and they get influenced by each other in different ways to kind of find what is working, what is not working. And once they start kind of reaching consensus, where the stars align again, we get the where BIM is at kind of piece, they're right in the middle. That's where our true BIM starts sitting and how we get them to work together. Now, if you've ever looked at anything of digital adoption, the cornerstones of BIM or pillars of BIM, you'll see these three circles as technology, people, and processes. And you can't truly get a cohesive BIM without all three of them being complied to. A lot has happened in the technology side of how to BIM with this software and how to do it in that software and what to do when. And then you get the processes, and the ISO has been like the more recent adoption of the processes of BIM. And these technology and processes have been really kind of two cornerstones of getting everything on par. But what has been very much lacking in, or less focus given towards on a public display, is the people. How do we actually get people to join in? How do we actually make it that BIM is successful? So these collaboration works together, and that's once you get them all working together, you get the BIM Summit, the peak of where BIM is at, where again everything aligns. Now, this is where we start moving away the focus from tech, but towards the people, the individuals, and trying to get that transition to happen. Then it goes into kind of human capital, as the individuals and the people, we need to understand how to motivate or help this BIM process along. So just straight off the bat, people are the key to success. We can have excellent technology, we can have perfect processes, but if you don't have people, the right people to do it, everything will fall over from every aspect. So if you start looking at human capital, there's some important factors we do need to understand. We need to make sure that the right skills are in place through education and training. We need to make sure that the right knowledge is acquired and attained within the organization over time. Through skills and knowledge, we start building more expertise in our fields of specialization or industries to really create different jobs and roles that'll improve what we're trying to achieve with BIM. And ultimately, we need to make sure that everyone has that right attitude to making sure that this adoption happens. From new people to more experienced people to directors, everyone, the people's traits, the attitude is really the cornerstone of success. But the one important thing we cannot forget is our health. So the more technology, the more processes that it's coming along across the board, is we get distracted and overwhelmed by technology. And we do need to understand to be able to break away, reset ourselves or refocus, and then drive it all again. And that's really how we start focusing on the areas of achieving BIM. Now, there are two major groups we can look at when we look at individuals, our leaders and our followers. So our followers are typically our leaders of the future. They're the people that are a little bit slower on the adoption of newer technologies. And our leaders aren't necessarily managers. It's anyone that's trying to drive this change from a junior to a senior person. Leaders are really the people who are becoming the influencers in these communities to drive it. So in order to be successful, looking at those areas of human capital, we need to understand that there are skill sets that are required and continuous changes from learning and development, adaptability, collaboration and communications. As different individuals, we need to be able to build up these skill sets to really improve of how we work going forward. Now, as a big kind of focus and something I do align with a lot, we do need to become more curious about the world of technology and about BIM, especially if you've heard of it but never really researched it or looked at it. You need to become curious. And then as a second thing is share your knowledge to co-develop this kind of different future, from sharing it to colleagues, to friends in the same industry, to anyone that kind of wants to learn more. By sharing that, we're actually growing and we're changing this culture. And that's where we need to start looking at, going from a people culture and shifting with a cultural change. And that eventually starts leading us to go from individuals, the person, to a community of like-minded thinkers, people that want to talk about this, share their expertise, share their knowledge, teach other people of, that don't understand. But you start creating this community around people that are really like-minded thinkers in the same field that you normally are. This kind of leads me to this case study between HBA Architects and the University of Pretoria. And I do want to thank them for allowing me to present their slides. This is their work and that they are doing with students on a project for the University of Pretoria. So as a quick background to the project, the university has these two greenhouses that's kind of historically been there for years. And they're trying to understand how do they reuse these buildings in the future. So Johan had this slide up of why do we care about materials? So the construction industry is really some of the more wasteful projects or industries. And we really need to understand that we need to mitigate this from greenhouse gas emissions, wasted materials, global waste, landfills, etc. And this is kind of the foothold of what they want to achieve by reducing the building's decommissioning process. So when you start looking at this project and how they're kind of working through it, they're starting with the design process. And then that design eventually goes into a buildable stage of having a building. That ultimately processes through to an operation stage and going into a decommissioning and repurposing. And then as a closeout, that will go inform new design processes, either as a reuse or repurpose building or a decommissioning, the end of life cycle of it. But what this project is doing it kind of differently is, or not differently, but what they've put as a core focus is that it should be a BIM collaboration. They're trying to bring in these concepts and principles of BIM throughout this whole process. Now, currently, the project is trying to inform the next design stage. They understand there's a building, and they need to understand the building in order to understand how they're going to reuse it or decommission it. And that's where the LCA development comes in, to understand what we have, what can we use, and how we could potentially use it in the future, and to ultimately to better inform the build of the new buildings, etc. So if you look at this project, there's the two greenhouses. And they've used all sorts of new technologies, old technologies from hand measurements to LiDAR to photogrammetry, to kind of generate some context around it. And when they started developing their task and role allocations network, you could see kind of the traditional approach to this items. And through that process, they've also developed their own little BIM execution plans, tracking of what they were doing, how they're doing it, etc. And even defining the LODs on how they progress. Now, the modeling is really growing from a simple shape all the way through to high fidelity models with extensive information. Now, this project is still ongoing, so they haven't fully achieved the outcomes, but they are growing and learning through it. But through the process of what they're trying to achieve, it's like the Meccano effect or IKEA methodology of really showing the full assembly process of this building to be able to take it down and rebuild it in a new location or repurpose elements of it for different buildings, etc. And that's really the focus of how they want to achieve this going forward. Now, through this little community exercise, they started with smaller divisions, and you could see it with, 3 kind of clusters. And the consulting team actually grew with quantity surveyors, construction economics students, structural engineering joining in. More and more people participated in this project, not because they have to, but because it was interesting and they wanted to. And you also started seeing a little bit of the bigger stakeholder engagement from the likes of the city of Tshwane, UP facilities and Hatfield CID to give the context to, what is happening on projects for, BIM projects and asset projects. And when you look at the standard or traditional allocation network, what was interesting, the change as the guys got more and more into it, you start seeing the spaghetti processes where it becomes not confusing, but very intricate in where what happens. How do you work together? How do you collaborate? How do you share information? And really, the focus on all of the components of BIM. Now, Kaleda, this nice little quote where it's like, before we tech, we need to culture. We've got a lot of understanding of technology, but we need to build a culture around this. I do want to take a moment and just give thanks to the guys at UP and HBA Architects for allowing me to present their slides and their project. I'm really keen to see how this goes and moves forward over the next few months or years. But what I wanted to highlight was that, individual communities that started growing these social extents of what is happening. Like I mentioned, there was these small little pockets of groups of people that started a project, and through a social engagement, more people joined in on this project to take it further. Now, a lot of you guys are thinking, cool, that's all amazing. And we do want to get to this kind of social aspect of BIM through individuals and communities, but how do we get there? But let's look at, a little bit of a roadmap for you guys to get there. So as we started with tech and processes, but ultimately tech starts improving the individuals. As technology enhances, our skills enhances in how we use software and how we implement it. From an individual standpoint, we start going into a community stage where more individuals create a community of like-minded thinkers and people wanting to achieve the same thing. And once we start getting these different communities mingling and co-creating stuff, we encouraging social gatherings or social engagements to build more, to collaborate more, to enhance the industry across the sector. So it's not just individuals. And that ultimately the social starts influencing, how the technology should be used or how collaboration should be approached and communication within these tools. And really at the back of it, we're running a BIM culture, to really put an underlining emphasis on how we do these collaboration projects for individuals. So here's a little bit of some pointers on how to get going. I always like to start with doing company investigations to understand where you are, where you want to go to with digital technologies, with your people and your processes. I do recommend always check out your staff. They might know more than they let on. I've seen so often where people actually in organizations understand and read more, but they never share that knowledge with their co-workers or their managers or their leaders in the organization. Do a competency check. As much as you've got people, you also need to understand where they're at within the different areas of technology, processes, and the people to understand where do we need to gain skills, where do we need to upskill, etc. Record your progress as you grow as you grow more and more into this BIM framework, this BIM culture. You need to understand to record that and be able to learn from mistakes and expand more on your wins to be able to produce better work going forward. And as tenders come in or jobs, it was always good to be able to talk to a client and tell them what you've learned in past projects and share that knowledge again, good or bad. We need to be able to communicate that in different ways. And then grow your people more based on lessons learned of the past of different projects, just to be able to have better skills in-house. And ultimately, don't see BIM as just a project delivery, but rather as a human driver to really better us all. I have kind of a nice belief to say that for me, BIM is a temporary name. In the future, it'll just be the way we work. It won't be anything special. It'll just be the right thing to do. And just don't do it alone. Join a community, create a social gathering, expand on it. I do like to thank you guys for, listening in on my conversation. Hope you found it informative, and then you really have, any questions or comments, please let me know. So thank you everyone again. 3, 2, 1.